Good morning, everyone. This is Tom Wilder with the North Carolina Department of Labor, and I want to go ahead and welcome everybody to our record keeping and reporting webinar. Again, it's good having everybody this morning. I have a few people signed on, but I have several people that either aren't going to sign on or are late, so we'll see if we get a lot of our late people sign in here in a few minutes, because I had about 48 people register. So right now I'm hoping they'll show up, but if they don't, we'll keep going here. Again, I'm Tom Wilder. I'll do your webinar today. We're doing on record keeping and reporting. And a lot of you already know me, but right now I have about 7 years experience with the Department of Labor. And prior to that, I worked 28 years in various safety training and quality management positions in the textile, machine assembly, and pharmaceutical industries. Most of those years were in pharmaceutical manufacturing, from which I am now retired. So a little bit about me. We'll go over the logistics for those of you who are new to this Webinato product. We want to make sure you look around your workout area and try to limit any distractions. If you have an office, you might want to close the door, turn your phones off. If you're in a cubicle, it might be a good idea to use headphones and put up a do not disturb note. Our tool again will be Webinato today. You'll see the PowerPoint slides in the center of the screen, so everybody should see a slide there. If you're using a mobile device, you may have problems with that, so we recommend computers. At the bottom left, you'll see an emoji, which I'm not going to be using, but at the bottom, you'll see a chat box, which you'll be typing chat and questions to me during the session. And as before, to get credit, you have to attend at least 80% of the course. I'll be checking the times after the webinar, and we can't give credit to anyone who's not registered and logged in. So if you have people sitting around that aren't registered and logged in, we can't give them credit. But those of you who are registered, logged in, and are online long enough, you'll get a certificate, should receive it within 3 weeks. If you don't get it within that time, give us a call. Our webinar today is scheduled for an hour and a half, but regardless of length, you will get an hour and a half credit, because we don't know how long they're going to last, because sometimes we get more questions and comments than others. So that's our logistics that we normally go through. And let's go ahead and go through our instant polls. Again, I like to do these before every one of my webinars. And we want to go ahead and ask your experience level with this topic. So what is your experience level with record keeping and reporting? Like I said, everybody's not signed in yet, but it's always a good idea to see where you stand as far as this topic. And we will be presenting to the lowest level. So if you're a beginner, you may be receiving a lot of new information. If you've been in the safety field for a long time, you may know most or everything that I cover today. And if that's the case, that's good. And but if you learn one thing today that you didn't know, of course, that's good as well. So it looks like we have almost a split between beginner and intermediate. And a lot of times you might be an advanced person, but you're reluctant to click on advanced because some people consider that to be an expert. And this is a tough topic, so I respect the fact that you may not be clicking advanced. So let's go ahead and stop that poll and close it. And then I'll do the second poll, which will be your professional safety experience. How many years of professional safety experience do you have? So I like to see where everybody's falling there as well. And as we usually have, we usually have a big diversity there in experience. And a lot of us can remember our first day in the safety field, and it's amazing how fast time goes by. So like I said, I can remember my first year, and next thing you know, you've been in the safety field over 20 years. So again, it goes by fast. And wow, we have a few people that have over 10 years. That's just exceptional. So I want to go ahead and stop that poll and close it. And the one thing I will tell you up front here today is we're going to cover record keeping and reporting of fatalities and injuries only. This webinar does not cover workers' compensation. So a lot of times we'll get workers' compensation questions, but we don't want to go there because that's apples and oranges. And again, this is not a workers' compensation class. Like I said, that's a whole different animal. Or the injury tracking application. We're not going to be covering that as well. You know, that's required for some of you that keep records by federal OSHA. And they run that entire system. So we're not going to get into the ITA questions either. We have a little bit on our website, but if you, we essentially forward everything up to Washington when you get into those ITA questions. So we will not be covering that. And as we get into next year, you're going to be, those of you who keep records, you're going to be continually and finally finishing your 2018 OSHA 300 log, and you'll be preparing for your 300A summary, which you'll be posting February through April. So again, that's our lead in to the topic. Looks like we've got a lot more people signed in today here at 10:06, so that's good. So let's go ahead and get started. Now we're going to cover who must comply with the standard. So if you look in the standard is the 1904 standard. And if you own a regulation book for general industry or construction, generally they'll publish the 1904 standard near the front of the book. So if you're looking for it and you have a regulation book, at least one of ours that we sell, you'll see 1904 in the beginning of the book, and it tells who must comply and who must keep records, and we'll cover that. And we'll cover the reporting requirements. When do you need to call, if you're in North Carolina, essentially state OSHA or North Carolina Department of Labor, when do you have to make that phone call? And what needs to be on the record? We're keeping this OSHA log. What actually is required to be on that record? Now, a lot of people will end up recording things on their OSHA log that doesn't even need to be there. So I guess it's better to do it that way than to not record something that should be there. We'll talk about other issues, and we'll also talk a little bit about the forms that you fill out, the 300, the 300A, and the 301. Now, as it's been for a while, who must record? If you had 10 or fewer employees throughout the entire year, you don't have to keep these records. Or if you look at the record keeping standard 1904, you'll see a list of NAICS code occupations or employers that are exempt from keeping these records. An example would be a doctor's office, a dentist office, let's see, electronic stores, gasoline stations, clothing stores. It's a big long list of employers that do not have to keep these records. So if you have any question whether you're exempt or not, you need to go to Appendix A in 1904 and look at that list. Now, if you are exempted from keeping these OSHA logs or records, it doesn't change your requirements to call in under certain situations. That would be what we call reporting. Now, when do you need to call in? Now, some of you may be outside the state of North Carolina. We have people log in from other states, and some of these states are regulated directly by federal OSHA. Some are state plan states like North Carolina that run the program under the direction of federal OSHA. But here in North Carolina, of course, you need to call us, and I'll give you that information later. But the slide says all work-related fatalities within 8 hours. Actually, what we mean there is if you have an employee that dies at the workplace, you need to call it in no matter what. Even if it is not caused by the workplace or related to the workplace, you need to go ahead and call it in. So if it's not tied to the job, it's not going to go on your OSHA log. But if it's caused by or related to the work, then of course it would go on your log and you would have to call it in. Now, also you'll have to call in if you have a person hurt at your workplace and they're transported to the hospital and admitted for care and treatment. Then you would have to call that in within 24 hours. That's even if it's only one employee, that has to be called in within 24 hours. Now, a lot of companies or employers make a mistake, and they think that if they send somebody to the hospital, they automatically have to call essentially state or federal OSHA agencies. Um, but you don't have to call in unless they are admitted for care and treatment. If they're admitted for observation only or diagnostic test, you don't have to call it in. But if they're admitted for care and treatment, you have to call that in within 24 hours. Amputations have to be called in within 24 hours. Amputation could be loss of a bone, a part of a bone, an arm, leg, or it could be a fingertip, even if it doesn't even include the bone. So amputations have to be called in within 24 hours. And you may be very surprised how many amputations we're having nationally. We get reports called in every week in North Carolina regarding workplace amputations. So that's really kind of shocking if you didn't, if you saw what we see here, how many people are losing essentially body parts, small, tiny body parts or bigger body parts due to amputations. And the last one is you must call in if somebody loses an eye in an accident. And what that means is physically losing the eyeball. That doesn't mean loss of vision. And it is kind of curious to me why the federal government put that in there, because I must admit I hadn't heard too many cases in my career of people physically losing their eye. But it's on there and it is a requirement. And you must report either on paper or in any way in case of the Bureau of Labor Statistics, state Department of Labor, or federal OSHA request a survey. Okay, so in the 1904 standard, you have 1904-39, which talks about reporting fatalities or one or more hospitalizations, amputations, or losses of an eye. Now, one person that's hospitalized, we call that a catastrophe. Now, before 2015, the requirement was 3 or more hospitalized was a catastrophe. Well, now that's much stricter, that if you have one person hospitalized, admitted for care and treatment, that needs to be called in. A 1904.40, providing records to the government, 41, annual survey, and 1904-42, requests from BLS. Now, if you're in North Carolina, and I know some of you are calling in from other states, here are the numbers that you would actually call. And after hours, the state Capitol Police here in Raleigh covered that to patch the number to the right person. So we have these numbers that you can report a fatality within 8 hours. Now, you don't have to report a fatality if somebody gets hurt and dies more than 30 days later after that employee is hurt. So that's kind of an exception there. And again, you're going to be calling these numbers, or you can do an online reporting on our website. Now, these other examples we give, hospitalization, one or more, amputation or eye loss, must be reported within 24 hours. Okay, Richard, you question elevator accidents. Now, I guess that's kind of funny. We do regulate elevators. Now, accidents themselves don't have to be reported, but we're talking about injuries and fatalities. You know, an accident is something that causes damage to property or people or the environment. We're concerned mainly about the people. And I think you're probably trying to be funny there, but if you're being serious about this, elevator accidents themselves would not have to be called in. Now, if they got picked up by the media, if it's an elevator accident, it's picked up by the news media. If it's a serious accident, that doesn't mean that OSHA won't show up, but just because you have an accident, it doesn't mean that you necessarily have to call it in. Okay, you don't have to call in anything that where somebody's hospitalized more than 24 hours after the incident. Now, amputation, loss of an eye, usually that doesn't apply there when you're talking about greater than 24 hours because generally it happens at the time of the accident. And if somebody's hospitalized for diagnostic testing, that does not need to be called in. Okay, now you don't have to call in if it's a motor vehicle accident, unless it's a construction work zone or a commercial public transportation accident. But it still could be recordable on the OSHA log. Now, we do have some people. Can everybody hear me? We got somebody reporting loss of audio. Can y'all hear me out there? Okay, thank you, Wanda and Erica and Danielle. I'll go ahead and type audio issues are on your end. And audio is okay. Is okay for others. Okay, so those of you who have audio issues, you're only going to be able to read the chat. So I have no idea why some of you are having audio issues. And if you're on a mobile device, it may have something to do with that. I see we can tell who's on a mobile device. I'll just put it could be a mobile device issue. Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and get back on track here. Now, let me go ahead and stop. Is everybody okay? I know some people are having audio issues. Is everybody okay? Questions, comments? Okay, good. So I do check the chat as it's coming through, and I do regret that some of you are having some kind of audio issue. All right. So what is recordable? So if you're required to keep records, you're going to record, of course, all work-related fatalities. I'm talking about recording fatalities that are work-related. You're going to be again determining whether it's a new case and it meets one or more recording criteria. So, is it work-related? Did it happen in the work environment? Was it on company property? Was it in the parking lot? Was it in the building? Was it in the workplace? Did something happen to cause the condition or aggravate the condition? So it's going to be presumed to be work-related if it happens on your employer's premise. Now, I will tell you this right now. There are a lot of times people don't record because it happens in the parking lot and the person hasn't started their work yet. They hadn't clocked in. If the person has commuted to work and that commute has stopped, they've pulled into a parking place, they've turned their car off or truck, and they're getting out, and they're on company property. Once they get out of that vehicle, then that's going to be a potentially work-related injury, you know, depending on what happens. But if you got out of your car and walked a few feet and broke your leg, even if you hadn't clocked in, if it's on company property and your commute is ended, that would be a recordable accident. It's a fracture. It happens after the commute. And also, if you're at work and you're doing things that you're not supposed to be doing, like horseplay, if you're getting into some serious horseplay, which most companies say don't do that, serious horseplay, or if you're doing something that's not even part of your job. Let's say you work in an office and you go to work. Of course, you go to work, you work in an office, and things are slow in the office, and then you pull out knitting needles and you start knitting something. Well, most people that work in offices aren't paid to knit. Well, let's just say somebody slashed their finger with a knitting needle and it required stitches. Well, even though that's not part of the job, you can't ignore that because that happened at work and it's not something that's excluded from record keeping. If we used to have the record keeping expert here in the department, but she has retired, but she used to get a lot of really interesting questions. Let's say you have employees driving to work. They both get in the company parking lot at the same time, stop their vehicles. One gets out and shows somebody their new firearm. They have a new pistol. And maybe it's a company that allows people to bring firearms on the site. Let's say they get out of the car, somebody's showing somebody their pistol, and they accidentally shoot the other employee. Serious accident. That could be a potentially record. It's a potential recordable, and depending on the type of injury and stuff, has nothing to do with the job. So just remember, if something happens at work, then it could end up being recorded, even though it has nothing to do with work, nothing anybody was even asked to do. Now, let's go ahead and go to the exceptions. Now, if somebody's in the workplace, but as a member of the general public, and they get hurt, fall and break their leg, that would not be recordable. So let's say you work for a company that has a big auditorium, and you're in a small town, and you let the Lions Club or the Kiwanis Club or Rotary Club meet in your auditorium, and you're an employee, you're part of that organization. If you're back in your workplace, but it's not a work event, you're just in the building, that would not go on your OSHA log. Or if it's a family day or some non-work related event, would not be recordable if you had that type of injury, or if you had wellness, medical, fitness, or recreation programs. That would not be. Let's say you have a company softball team, it's volunteer, you break your arm sliding into base or leg, put your arm out, break it, or run into another player, and that's voluntary. That would not go on your OSHA log. Now, on the other hand, workers' compensation could be a different thing, and we're not talking about that today. I'm not going to go down that road. If you're eating, drinking, or preparing food, that's excluded. And if you're doing personal tasks outside of working hours, that's excluded. Let's say you're a parent, you have a child, and you're allowed to bring your child into work after hours and use your computer because you have some fancy printer that prints out some gigantic document or something special that your work equipment will do that you're allowed to use for personal use. You bring your child in and you're helping them with a project. And again, let's say you walk down the hall and fall over and break your arm. That's personal task outside of working hours. That would not go on your log because it has nothing to do with your job. Now, when you're at work, if you're grooming or taking medication, that's not included. Or if you intentionally hurt yourself, would not be included. But But if you have an accident in the parking lot and you're still part of your commute, that's not included. Once that commute ends, that's when record keeping starts. Like I said, common cold or flu, mental illness. Now, mental illness is not included unless mental illness is not included unless you can prove that that was caused by your job. Okay, so we got a question. What if you are in a company car? Now, that's really a good question. Let's say you have, let's say you're an executive. Now, sometimes company executives have special benefit packages, and sometimes they'll give a plant manager or a company president a car. That's just something the company gives them. Now, when the company gives them a car, and all they use it for is to drive to work. They're not performing any company business on the way. All they're doing is commuting. So once they're in that company car coming to work, a normal day, you're not stopping to do any business related stuff, then that would not be covered when you're in your commute. Now, if you're in a company car and you're doing any kind of business on the way, or if during the day you're taking the company car out as part of your job, that would be included. It's only not included when it's part of a commute. So, like I said, the company car, truck, again, it depends. Now, if you have a situation where you're some kind of emergency responder and it's normal for you to be called out during your commute to the station, again, that would be another exception. That would not be part of a commute. Now, I don't know if I've made that much clearer for you, but those are some examples I can think of. Okay, so Erica, hopefully you're okay with that answer. All right. Now, a case is new, like the slide says. If there's no record of injury, illness to same type, same body part, all signs and symptoms have disappeared, and everything's been cleared by physician. Now, that's why companies and employers are very strict about workplace injuries being covered by company healthcare providers, occupational healthcare providers, because the company healthcare provider or employer healthcare provider is going to represent the employer and the employee, and they're going to sign a release once the person can return to work and all. So again, you don't want that to be muddied up by somebody going to somebody that's not within the company system. So it's a new case that the person's been released. There's no carryover from any other injury. Now, typically, recording a fatality will be recorded as long as it's job related. Now, you're going to report a death. You're going to call it in if somebody dies job related. Now, you're going to report a death. You're going to call it in if somebody dies at work, but you're going to record it if it's related to or caused by the job. Days away from work, restricted transfers, medical treatment, loss of consciousness, or a significant injury, all those are going to be recorded. And we're going to talk a bit more about each one. Now, death, like I said, you're going to enter the details into the log when you're looking at your log A through F. And you're going to call in. We've already talked about that for a fatality. And if somebody gets hurt at work and they're sent out to an occupational health provider, typically, if they don't lose if they don't lose any part of the next day of work, if they only lose the time of the day of the injury, that's not a lost work day. So only when you get into the loss of the next day does that count as a days away from work. So if somebody's seriously injured, they may lose quite a few work days. It could be 30, 40 days. And if somebody's seriously hurt, you may need to go ahead and put an estimate on your log and revise it as time goes by, because it may be a serious injury where you really don't know. You're just going to have to put a good estimate on there and revise that as you go. And I'm going to get to your question, Dan, here in a second. And the count stops when you're counting lost work days when the person leaves for reasons other than the injury. Okay. All right. Dan has a great question. He says, are x-rays considered medical treatment beyond first aid? Now, I would not consider x-rays to be medical treatment. It's the result of, it's like a diagnosis. If the x-ray is negative, there's no fracture, that's not recordable. So just because somebody had an x-ray doesn't mean that goes on your OSHA log. But if they x-ray somebody and they've got a fracture, that is recordable, and that would be considered medical treatment. So just because you send somebody to a doctor and just because they do an x-ray automatically does not make it recordable. So that would be diagnostic. Hopefully that's clear, Dan. Now, you're welcome. Now, restricted work. Now, hopefully you work for a company or an employer that doesn't cheat on their safety program. Because if you cheat on your safety program, your employees are going to see that and they're not going to really respect your safety program. But some companies do. I mean, this is the real world. Some companies will do that because sometimes you'll see companies where the top people will actually get bonuses from their corporation based on their DART rate. So if they have any days away or restricted or transfer cases, they don't get their bonus. So restricted work means that somebody cannot perform one or more of their routine functions as a result of the accident. The doctors put them under restriction. So let me give an example. Let's say you work for a manufacturing company and you have a warehouse and you have forklift operators out there. You had one forklift operator not paying attention, run into a wall, and let's make it worse. They're not wearing their seatbelt, which they should. They're knocked off the fork truck, fall on their arm, and break their arm. Okay, they break the arm. Now, a fracture is going to be a recordable injury, no question about it. So let's say they fracture their arm, you know, that at the end of the day, at the end of that particular day, their arm is in a cast. There's nothing else to do except for them to return to work. Well, if they work in that warehouse, the company might say, well, you know what? We're going to keep you in the warehouse and we're going to put you in the office there and we're just going to have you doing paperwork all day long because you broke your right arm and you can write with your left hand or type with your left hand, whatever. We're going to just let you do paperwork all day long. So we're saying, hey, they're a warehouse worker and they're still working in the warehouse. I don't think they're restricted because they're doing warehouse duties. They're doing paperwork. But driving a fork truck is one of their main duties or primary duty to their job. That would be a restricted case and you would be counting days. So make sure that nobody inadvertently does the wrong thing as far as record keeping or tries to cheat. If you can't do one of your main duties, if you have somebody that mops floors, they fall over and break their arm and they can't mop floors anymore, and you have them do something else, that would be a restricted work. And like I said, you'll count calendar days of restricted work. Or you have somebody gets hurt, they can't do their primary job at all. You transfer them to another section or department. that would be a job transfer, and you would count those days as well. Now, medical treatment. Again, this is where we get into a lot of confusion on this standard. Now, this says management and care of patient to combat disease or disorder. Well, that's what we're calling medical treatment. We're saying anything beyond first aid, and it's not who does it; it's what do they do. So, medical treatment uh, examples typically are recorded. But if you sent somebody to the doctor off-site and all they did was perform first aid and there were no restrictions, that would not be recordable. So it doesn't include observation, counseling, test, or x-ray, first aid procedures, and first aid is defined. Of course, this next slide is on first aid. Now, the standard has a list of things that are considered first aid. So if it's anything on this list, then it's not going to by itself make it a recordable case. So first aid, they're taking non-prescription meds at non-prescription strength. They're receiving an immunization, cleaning, flushing wounds, covering wounds, hot or cold therapy, non-rigid means of support, temporary immobilization devices while transporting splint slings, drilling a fingernail or toenail to relieve pressure or drain fluid from a blister, using eye patches, removing foreign bodies that are not embedded into the eye, removing splinters by irrigation tweezers, using finger guards, non-therapeutic massages, and drinking fluids for relief. So if it's any of those things, that is not going to be by itself recordable. So that's first aid. Now, here you'll see an over-the-counter drug product prescribed by a physician at prescription strength is medical treatment. So let's say somebody bumps into the wall, they fall and they hit the wall, and their arm's a little bit bruised. They go to the doctor, and the patient says, "Oh, my arm's really hurting. You know, what should I do? I'm glad that it's not broken." And maybe the doctor writes down, take 3 or 4 Advil or ibuprofen or Motrin, 3 or 4 of those as needed. Now, if the doctor says take more than 2, now those are 200 milligram. Anything over 467 is prescription strength. Now 800 would be prescription strength too. If a doctor writes down mandates that you take more than 2 ibuprofen, that alone would make it recordable, even though it's not a prescription. If they give them, they say take more than 50 milligrams of Benadryl, or the generic equivalents, or over 220 milligrams of naproxen sodium, which would be your Aleve and other products, and greater than 25 milligrams of ketoprofen, which is like a Rutus KT. If you're giving people over the counter at prescription strength, that automatically makes it a recordable injury. Now, let me expand a little bit further. Let's say somebody gets hurt, they go to the doctor, no big deal, they're okay, they come home, there's no restriction, they don't lose any work days, none of it. And they go to their supervisor, and let's say it's a new supervisor, they're not very well trained, and the supervisor says, I know you're hurt, I'm going to ask you to take 4 ibuprofen tablets. Now that's prescription strength. 4 Advil, 4 Motrin, whatever brand. Even if a company employee, a supervisor or management says take 4 of these, there's somebody telling their employee to take non-prescription at prescription strength, that would make it recordable. So make sure you tell your supervisors and managers not to play doctor or nurse, because sometimes some things that they do will will cause it to be a recordable accident. Or, due to your injury, you must take a few days off. Well, those would be lost work days mandated by the company. So again, they need to know the requirements. Now, oxygen. If you're given it as a precautionary measure, it's not medical treatment. But if it's part of a medical procedure, it would be medical treatment. So oxygen can go either way. All right. I know we're going through a lot here. How's everybody doing? Any questions or comments? How you doing? Are y'all still awake out there? Like I said, it's dry. I mean, I'm trying to make it as entertaining as I can. Okay. Now, loss of consciousness. If you have somebody that loses consciousness, regardless of the amount of time, that's going to be recordable. Okay? Pretty simple. Significant injuries. If somebody develops cancer related to work, long-term exposure to benzene or some carcinogen related to the job, that would be recordable. Fractures, cracked bones, including teeth, is recordable. And punctured eardrums. So those are some examples of slam dunk injuries that would be going on your OSHA log. Now, record keeping also gets into needle sticks and sharps. Let's say you're in the medical field and you have needles and those sorts of devices. You may need to keep a sharps injury log. So if somebody has a needle stick that's contaminated with somebody else's blood, then that's going to be recordable on your OSHA log and on a sharps injury log. Medical removal would be if the OSHA requires you to monitor somebody for lead or cadmium exposure, and their levels are high enough to remove the job for some kind of poisoning, then that would be a case. And we're going to get into those. This is just a lead-in slide. Hearing loss is very confusing. So we'll get into that some more here in a second, and also tuberculosis. So let's go ahead and go into all these sections. So if you have somebody that's exposed to somebody else's blood or body fluid, like from a needle stick, or it could be somebody getting up broken glass. Now, when you hire employees, some of your safety rules should be when glass is broken, use a broom and dustpan. Do not pick up broken glass with your bare hand, because if you do, there's a chance you're going to get cut. And if you get cut and somebody comes up and helps, and they get cut with that same glass, and they get exposed to your blood and body fluids, then that's going to be a sharps injury, and that's going to go on your OSHA log. Okay? All right. Tanya asked, all of this information is in the general standards book. Pretty much so, yes. You should find that. And there's also a lot of extensive information on the OSHA website, osha.gov. There's tons of information and also interpretations there. So you should be able to find most of this in the regulation itself. Maybe not all the examples I give, but a lot of the information. Okay, now let's say you have somebody that works with lead or cadmium, and there's an OSHA standard. You have them in a medical surveillance program. If they have blood tests or results that show that they need to be removed from the job, that would go on your OSHA log. Now, a lot of employers don't get into that, but that would be a medical removal. Now, one of the most interesting ones to me is hearing loss. Now, question number one, do you work at a place or does your employer have a hearing conservation program? In other words, did they monitor employees and they had exposures of 85 decibels or above for 8-hour time-weighted average? And you have a hearing conservation program. Well, if you're working somewhere like that and they test your hearing annually, and somebody has a standard threshold shift, you have an employee and after, say, a year, they lose 10 decibels of hearing at 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 hertz, then that would be called a standard threshold shift. Now, today's class is not on hearing conservation. So I don't want to get too sidetracked because we could spend an hour, hour and a half talking about that. But here's the thing. A lot of people think that a standard threshold shift, hearing loss, automatically makes it a recordable illness. That by itself is not recordable. Now, the OSHA standard will tell you a lot of things that you need to do because of that. You're probably going to do a retest to make sure it's not temporary. But a standard shift by itself is not recordable. So it has to be both of these things that are on this slide. It has to be a shift, and they have to lose an average of 25 decibels above audiometric zero. So that's what we call a permanent hearing loss. So they have to have a shift and a permanent hearing loss to be recordable. Now, one thing you'll know, if you have employees and you have a hearing conservation program, those employees come in as new employees. Many of them, or probably most of them, are not going to have perfect hearing to begin with. So your shifts are going to be measured against the baseline. But the 25 dB that's on that second bullet is measured against audiometric zero. That's measured against perfect hearing. So somebody has a lot of hearing loss upon hire. Once they have a shift after that, it may become recordable. So anyway, if that's all confusing to you, maybe you should sit in one of our noise classes and we can go into great depth on that. But a shift alone won't make it recordable. So like I said, when you're given a hearing test and they're putting out those tones at 2,000, 3,000, and 4,000 hertz, if you can't hear that tone, they're amplifying that tone until you can hear it. And say 2,000, they have to amplify it by 10 dB. That would be 10. So all three of them, if they have to amplify it that much, that would be a shift. So did you have a shift? Did you have a shift? Is it work related? And you have an 25 dB loss against audiometric zero, that would be recordable. Now, if you don't have a shift, you don't have a 25 against audiometric zero, and it's not work related, you're not going to record. So here's, well, of course, we're beating this to death, but now some of this is going to really look like Chinese to you, especially if you don't have a hearing conservation program. So I apologize for that. So we have a new employee. They go through an audiogram, and at 2,000 hertz, at zero amplification, they can't hear the tone. They bump it up to 10, they hear it. They hear it at 5 on 3,000 and at 10 dB at 4,000. So you have an average shift of 10 dB. So there are things you have to do, but you don't have a 25 dB loss measured against 0. Like I said, if you have questions about that later, you can call me after the webinar. We'll talk more about it. Okay, Dan's got a question. In the field I work in, there have been occasions where clients spit on staff. Okay, not to be gross, but if it gets into the staff's mouth or open wound, is that considered exposure and therefore be considered recordable? Okay, Dan. Wow, we're getting some 5-star questions here. Now, spit in the dentist office is considered other potentially infectious materials, but in a dentist office, that's because they're doing dental work, and the spit is contaminated with blood. Normal spit, and we're not talking about the dentist office, normal spit would not be considered automatically an exposure of another employee and would not be recordable. Now, if you have anything that's classified as an infectious material that goes into the mouth or open wound, that would be recordable. But spit by itself, unless it's in dental work, would not be. So that's, now you can get some more clarification on that. And if you find out any differently, let me. Now you can get some more clarification on that. And if you find out any differently, let me know. But right now, based on what you're saying, it would not be. You're welcome. Okay. Work-related tuberculosis. Now, if you work in certain healthcare fields or long-term care, a lot of the workers are going to be required to have a TB test, and they do TB test on a particular routine. Now, if somebody contracts the infection, just the bacterial TB infection, and it's work-related, then that would go on your OSHA log. Now, that would be just a simple entry. Now, if that develops into the actual disease tuberculosis, where somebody's infectious, that would be a modification there, or there'll be more that you'd have to make a little change to your log there, because that's infection and the disease. So, but the infection alone would be recordable. Now, in record keeping, if you're required to keep record, you're going to have your 300 log, and then your 300A, and then you're going to have an injury and illness incident report, which is going to be the official Form 301 or an equivalent, as long as it contains the same information as an official 301. Now here's your 300 log, and I know it's too small for you to be able to read, but a lot of the reg books have a 300 log in the very back. And if you got a ManCom book, it actually shows one filled out with examples. So, like I said, the one I'm looking at is case number 21. Mark Bagan, a welder, got hurt on 5/25. He was in the basement. And what happened in the F, fractured left arm and left leg from a fall from ladder. He lost work days. He lost 12 work days and was on restriction for 15, and they checked a simple injury under M. So anyway, if you don't know how to fill out these OSHA logs, it's always a good idea to practice or to go through an OSHA workshop. Sometimes we'll give an OSHA workshop, and what that does is let people practice filling out these forms. So if you've never seen one of these forms, never filled one out, just going through this webinar is not going to be good enough for you. You're going to need a little bit more training than that. And this slide talks about all the different columns. Case number, employee's name, what's their job title, when did this happen, where did this happen, and what happened. Like I said, you give examples. Hammer hit, let's just say hammer hit left hand causing fracture. of thumb, right thumb. I mean, that would be something you might see on a OSHA 300 log. Now, G through J, it'd be good to be looking at a log. You're only going to be checking one of these. You've got to check one. Was it a death? Was it, and of course the death would have to be work caused by the job or work related. If it wasn't a death, did they lose time? Not including the date of the accident. Did they lose days? Were they restricted or transferred? Yes or no? And if it was just a simple recordable case where no lost time and they didn't die, it'd be other recordable cases. But you'd have one check mark. You know, G through J, you're going to have at least one check mark. And it's always got to be the most serious check mark. Transfer or restriction isn't as serious as days away from work. So if they lost days and were restricted, you're going to check days away. Okay, Samantha asked, how often do we have OSHA workshops? Now, that's a good question. You'll just have to be on the lookout for them because that's something we don't do all the time. I know Wanda Hughes is on this webinar. Wanda Hughes, when Wanda worked for us, she helped develop our OSHA workshop that we do. So hopefully we'll be able to give one this year, maybe at one of the sites or maybe at one of the events. But that's something we typically don't do on a webinar. But there are other organizations that give training where you can have an in-depth training on record keeping. So if you see something where they take a day and you go and you practice filling out logs and stuff, that's a great idea. Now, like I said, we do it from time to time, so you just have to keep on the lookout for that. Okay, K through L, we're going to put the number of days away from work, and transfer restriction, but in any case, you're never going to exceed 180 days. Now, let's say, of course, we're in December right now, and let's say you had a serious injury to one of your employees, and they were going to lose a lot of work days. Now, if we're recording it now and we were estimating, say, 60 days, we would put 60 days on our OSHA log for this year. Don't put any of this year's information on your 2019 OSHA log. So that information does not carry over to the next log. You're going to have 180 day max, and all those days need to go on this year's log. And if you're estimating now, you have to make adjustments as you go. Okay, Tanya asked, do you print the log from the OSHA site? And if there are no, okay, yeah. You can go to the federal OSHA site, or should be able to unless they pulled it. They should have something there where you can print it out, or you can save it as an Excel spreadsheet. You can keep it electronically or paper. And if there are no recordable injuries or illnesses, you fill it out and it would be a blank log that you would keep. That's correct. So you're going to keep it electronically or you're going to print it. You're going to keep it current. And if you're fortunate enough to not have any injuries or illnesses, you'll have a blank record pretty much for that year, except for your company name and address and all that would be at the top. Good question. Okay, column M. You're going to be putting a check mark. You're going to have at least one check mark there. Was it a simple injury? Was it a skin disorder, respiratory condition, poisoning, hearing loss, or all other illnesses? So you'll have at least one check mark in one of those sections in column M. Okay, your OSHA log must be kept up to date. So within 7 calendar days, you're going to retain it for 5 years and must be provided to OSHA inspectors within 4 business hours If you have OSHA compliance officer come in and for a programmed inspection for sure, and many other inspections, they're going to ask to see your OSHA logs. If they ask, they'll probably ask for 3 years right off the bat, and they can ask for up to 5 years. So you could have a compliance officer come in and say, I want to see your current OSHA log, and I want to see the logs for the last 3 years. And then they may ask for another couple of years. And if you can't get that information within 4 hours, then that's going to be a big issue. And that might make somebody think that you don't have one, or you're trying to fabricate something. That's something you should be able to provide quickly to a government investigator or inspector. Now your 300A, I will tell you that years ago when I first started in industry, we had the OSHA 200 log. So I will tell you there was a big change. It's about the year 2000 between the 200 and the 300. So right now, February through April, you're going to be posting in a prominent place within your workplace your summary, your 300A in your workplace, and it's going to summarize essentially how you did for the past year. So your 300A, again, you're going to fill it out and post it. Now, again, I will tell you, if you don't know anything about recording or reporting or any of this, OSHA.gov especially has a lot of information there on how to calculate rates and fill out logs. You'll find when you do some research there, there's a lot of information that you can find there that will explain a lot of this. Your injury report, of course, you're going to have to do that for any injury, and that has to be done within 7 days, because you've got to take care of a victim. You got to do an accident investigation. You got to try to find a root cause and eliminate all that. You should be right on that. So obviously that's going to be completed within 7 calendar days. And whether you use an official Form 301, as long as your company or employer's 301 is similar in content, you can do that. Now, sometimes you get somebody develop an illness at work. Let's say they were infected by somebody else's blood or body fluid or something where you want it to be a privacy case. Instead of putting their name on there, you can list privacy case and keep a separate list cross-referencing those names. So you may have privacy cases, and these will be injuries to, like I said, the injury to an intimate body part, reproductive system, sexual assault, mental illnesses, HIV, hepatitis TB infection, needle stick, sharp injuries, or something that an employee wants to keep a little bit more private. They'll put privacy case on the where it says employee name. You'll just list privacy case on the log. Okay, now your employee involvement. You need to tell your employees how to report injuries and illnesses. And also, the employers must provide limited access to records for employees and authorized representatives. So employees must know how to report, and we must have complete information and then provide privacy protection to some of these records. Now, we can't discriminate against employees. We can't fire people just because they reported an accident. You know, there are a lot of discrimination things like that where legally you can't discipline, demote, or fire an employee because of reporting injuries or fatalities or illnesses. And other privacy issues, you need to be careful with that as well. Now, we've talked about reporting, recording, forms, criteria, other requirements, and employer responsibilities. And guess what? I have got some time. It is only 11:05. So, since I don't have a lot of questions or comments now, let's go ahead and see how well we have done today. So I'm going to go ahead and do some instant polls today, and hopefully you're brave enough to answer the questions because we're going to learn from this. So let's go ahead and do record keeping question number 1. Is this not recordable or recordable? Treatment limited to cleaning, soaking, applying antiseptic, and bandaging a wound. Is that not recordable or recordable? This is so much fun. And we're going to learn from this. Now, 19 of you say not recordable, 4 say recordable. That is not recordable. So those of you that said recordable, I know you're trying to err on the side of caution, but if all you're doing is cleaning, soaking, applying antiseptic, and bandaging, that is not recordable. That's considered to be first aid. So the 3 of you that answer recordable, that's okay. We want you to learn and remember the correct answers. So let's go ahead and go to question number 2. Let's go ahead and pull it up. I need to find it. Here we go. Medical glue was applied to close multiple lacerations. Now, I hope the 3 people that answered the last time wrong, hopefully you're still participating. I'm not trying to scare anybody away. Okay, you all did well because that is recordable. Because the key word there is close, not just cover. If you're closing a wound, whether it's stitches or medical glue, that is recordable. Good job. So I'll go ahead and stop and close that. And let's go to question number 3. Once I get to it. Here we go. Okay, butterfly bandages were applied to multiple lacerations. Maybe we should have phone a friend on this. Ask your neighbor. Okay. Now, those that answered not recordable are correct. This is not recordable. Now, I want to tell you that there are bad companies out there, I hope, or bad employers. I hope you don't work for them. I hope you work for the good people. Now, there have been companies that cheated, and you have somebody that cut to the point where they needed stitches, and they didn't do the right thing and close the wound. All they did was cover it with a bandage, a butterfly bandage. Now, if it's a butterfly bandage that's covering a wound that needed stitches, that's a problem. You're covering up something. I'm talking about not just covering it up, but not doing the right thing. If butterfly bandages are used the right way and it's not something that needs to be closed, that is only first aid. So good, your 20 people that answered, you are correct that it's not recordable. So let's go to number 4. I've got to pull it up. Let me find my question number 4. Here we go. I've got it. Okay. Applying non-prescription ointments on follow-up visits to prevent dry and cracking skins. Okay. You're all doing very well. That is not recordable. Congratulations. Everybody got that right. So let's go to question 5. Okay. Find number 5. There it is. Okay. Removal of an embedded foreign material from the eye. Okay. I'll let y'all keep populating this. Okay. Okay, I think we've got the people that want to answer. That is recordable. Now, the reason that's recordable is something that's embedded in the eye. You're not just washing something out. It's something that's stuck into your actual eyeball. So the fact that it's embedded, that would be recordable. Okay, let's stop that, and we're going to go to question number 6. And let me find question 6. It takes me a couple of minutes to do this. Okay, start. Second or subsequent hot and cold soaks and use of whirlpool treatments. Hot and cold soaks. Okay, hot and cold soaks. And that is not recordable. So that's hot and cold soaks. That's not recordable, okay? And let's stop and go to question 7. Let me pull it up. Look for question 7. And here we go. All right. Drilling a fingernail to drain the fluid and relieve the pressure. Now, this is something I mentioned before. And we're not talking about taking a power drill and drilling through the finger. This is properly drilling a fingernail to drain the fluid. Okay? Now, you might be surprised, but this one is not recordable. So the 7 of you that said not recordable, you are correct, because that's listed under first aid. Now, some of you may have never done that. Let's say you hit you're hammering and you hit your fingernail with a hammer and it didn't break your finger. And then you get like essentially a blood blister under your nail. So there's a technique, and you're not going to use a power drill to do this. You could take a little sterile bit or or something just to go barely through that nail to let that pressure off. That's actually first aid. Okay. But if you're ever going to drill a fingernail and you don't know how to do it, I wouldn't advise you trying it. It's not like you don't take a drill out and try to drill through somebody's nail. Not quite that simple. Okay, so that is not recordable. So let's stop that, close it, and I believe we are on question number 8. And let me find question 8. 8. Here we go. 8. All right. One-time administration of oxygen for several minutes. Okay. All right. Now here's a case where I don't have enough information. So here's a case where all of you are right. 20 of you said not recordable and 1 said recordable. If the oxygen is given just as a precautionary treatment and not part of a medical procedure, then it would be not recordable. If it was given as part of a standard medical procedure, it would be recordable. So oxygen can go both ways, So oxygen is not necessarily a slam dunk for recordability, but if it's part of standard medical treatment, it would be. So that one's kind of gray. So everybody's right. on that one. So that's question 8. Let's stop it and go to question 9. All right, I'm going to find question 9. I'm still looking for it. Here it is. All right, start. Following a chest x-ray, an employee was diagnosed with silicosis. Let's say they're a sandblaster and they don't use any protection. And silicosis is a disease of the lung typically caused by overexposure to crystalline silica. Now that's a pretty easy question. I was hoping nobody would miss that. That is recordable. Okay, let's stop and close it, and we're going to go to question number 10. All right, let me find question 10. Oops. There it is. All right, question 10. One-time administration of prescription medication to alleviate minor discomfort. Okay. All right. Okay, now we'll tell you that that is recordable because it's prescription strength medication. It's either giving somebody 4 ibuprofen or getting a prescription for 800. Anything that's prescription strength is gone to 800. Anything that's prescription strength is going to be recordable. So that is recordable. So let's stop and close it and go to number 11. And we're still doing good on time. So I'm looking at that too. So let's go to 11, and here it is. Additional cleaning and application of antiseptic because the bandage became soiled. Okay. All right. Everybody's doing well. That is first aid, and you are all correct. Let me close that and go to 12. All right. Let me find 12. There it is. All right. Medical removal as mandated by OSHA standard due to cadmium poisoning. Boy, that word poisoning, it's a pretty good indicator, I think. Yeah. So that of course is recordable, and you are all correct. Great. So let me stop, and we're going to go to question 13. Question 13. Here it is. All right. Okay. Employee injures back at work and has one chiropractic adjustment. So they have to go to the chiropractor to have an adjustment made. Okay, 17 of you, and a couple of you said, 17 said recordable, 2 said not. Now, one of you just changed your mind. Okay, now it is recordable. So that would be recordable, okay? So let's go to 14. 14. And here we go. Okay, share results. Somebody loses their consciousness. Hey, they were just unconscious but a minute, or they were only unconscious for 5 minutes. Okay, most of you got that right. That is recordable. Okay, stop, and we're going to go to question 15. And let's find question 15. Go and start. Following an x-ray of a rib for a fracture, the x-ray indicates the rib is not broken. Okay. Most of you got this right. That is not recordable. The key is there's no fracture. Just because you had an x-ray does not automatically make it recordable, but if it's a fracture, it is. But this says not broken, so this is not recordable. So let's stop, and we're going to go to question 16. We're almost finished. We got 20 questions. 16. Here we go, and start. Reaction to a flu shot that was administered in plant on a voluntary basis. And we're talking about flu shots, and we're talking about voluntary basis. Okay, you all got that correct. That is not recordable. Good job. Okay, I'm going to stop it, and we're going to go to 17. 17. Here we go. And here it is. The injury is a result of choking on a sandwich from the employee's brown bag lunch. Okay. Now this is an exclusion. So when you look in the OSHA standard, you want to look for exclusions. Just somebody eating their lunch or eating or preparing food, their own food, that's excluded. So this is not recordable. Okay. So most of you are correct. So let's stop and go to question 18. 18. Look for 18. Here we go. And start. Adding drops to an eye in order to dilate pupils for diagnostic purposes. Diagnostic purposes. Those are key words. So somebody has an injury and they're just looking at their eye and they're trying to figure out what's wrong. You are all correct because that is not recordable. Very good. And let's go to 19. 19. Let me find 19. Here we go. Here's 19 right now. Okay, needles stick from a sharp object contaminated with potentially infectious materials. So it could be broken glass, it could be a box cutter, it could be a needle in a medical situation, a nursing home. Okay, that is all recordable. So that is correct, and everybody got that right. Good job. So let me close, and we're going to go to the last question, number 20. There we go, it's 20, and start. Employee has work-related elbow pain and is given non-prescription medication at prescription strength. And it doesn't matter whether it's the doctor that did this or a supervisor. And like I said, unless your supervisor is like a medical professional, a nurse or doctor, don't have them dispensing and telling people what they need to take. You have to be very careful with that because that is recordable. Somebody told the employee to take 4 Motrin, 4 Advil, 4 ibuprofen, 800 milligrams, that's prescription strength, and that makes it recordable. Okay, all right. Anyway, let me go through the chat, and all right, I'm just making sure I didn't miss any comments. So I'm going to go ahead and stop that poll and close it. Right now it is 11:24. I'm going to go ahead and officially stop the webinar. I appreciate everybody being on today. Hopefully you learned something you didn't know before. And if you need to learn how to fill out OSHA logs, you need to go to a workshop, maybe one of ours. You know, we rarely do them, but we do them sometimes, or you might want to go to a little class on one. If you see one, if you get a letter saying OSHA record keeping workshop, you might want to go and practice filling out these documents. So, like I said, I'm finished. Hopefully you learned something today. You're welcome. Samantha, Candace, Wanda, Wendy, Zong, Elizabeth, Michael, Dan, Janice, Dennis, Ronnie. Okay, Alan's got a question. Ashley. Okay, Alan. And I'll see if I can answer your machine carding question, even though that's not what our topic was today, but that's okay. If it's simple, maybe I should be able to answer it right now. Thank you, Tanya, Richard, Ashley. So I'll hold on here and wait for Alan's question. I think he's typing it in. Okay, subcontractors. Okay, Dennis, that's a good question. Are subcontractors hurt on company premises recordable? They depend if the injuries meet the requirements for being recordable. Yes, they would be recordable. They would go on their company's OSHA log. Okay, you know, their company's OSHA logs. Anybody that reports to your company, temporaries or regular employees, would go on your log. A separate company that's on site, it would go on their logs. But if it's a recordable, if they break their arm or whatever, that would go on an OSHA log and it would go on their log. Hopefully that answers your question. Okay. Alan says we have a, okay, you're welcome, Dennis. We have a pivoting mold that's held by hoisting chain and moved by the operator. Oh, okay. Okay. Okay, Alan, I like that. I'm glad that's a question that I'm able to answer without doing any research. Okay, Alan, looks like you're correct. If you have a moving part and it, like I said, it moves, there's no speed. OSHA doesn't say anything about speed requirements for shafts or anything that turns. We have examples from our records of people being killed by shafts that were slow moving where they got caught into and there was nobody around and somebody slowly got pulled into their death. So RPM, there's no exclusion for RPMs or speed, the speed that something turns. If there is a hazard for somebody to be pulled in and hurt. So I'm with you, Alan. I'm right with you. I would say it does need to be guarded regardless of speed. If you want to get a formal response on that, you can send an email to askosh@labor.nc.gov. You can send your question to our standards officers that way, and they'll send you a formal response. But right now, I'm saying you're correct. Okay, good. Alan, you have a good weekend too. Dennis, you're welcome. So again, we're finished with the webinar, and I do appreciate everybody participating today. I'll go through the chat, and hopefully I didn't miss any questions. And I think we had a good session. So anyway, it is now 11:29. I'm going to go ahead and stop this webinar.